So Angry Black White Boy is a satire that deals with race, whiteness, and hip-hop. And it is my attempt in some ways to kind of jumpstart a dialogue on these things that, when I wrote it, had seemed to have stalled almost to a standstill. It seemed to me that a conversation about white privilege in particular was not something that anybody was invested in having. And when I say anybody, I mean anybody white. And so what I wanted to do was try to move the ball a little bit forward on that issue by delving into it through satire, through absurdity, through various strategies intended to get people caught off guard enough that they might be willing to engage. So really there are two levels to the kind of absurdity that I'm trying to deal with in the book. One is very simple. It's the absurdity of the fact that such an arbitrary system of oppression as race has been in place in this country for so long and has been allowed to savage so many generations of lives, right? That is in itself absurd, right? You with me? Yeah, okay. The second absurdity is a little bit more difficult to explain, a little bit more abstract. I think of it as the absurdity of the ways in which we are all sort of forced into these hermetically sealed identities around race, class, gender, sexuality, economic status, any number of factors, and they sort of create this bubble around us. And we navigate the world encased in these bubbles, and only occasionally does something so unexpected happen that those bubbles sort of burst or shatter, they fall away, and they reveal the inner workings, the true humanity of the people that lie trapped within, right? And this can sometimes be very absurd, very funny, very real. And I realize that too, nice kiss, is a very abstract thing to say, so let me try to illustrate what I mean. So like most examples, this one revolves around real estate. So about 7 years ago, I was living in Brooklyn, New York. Is anybody from Brooklyn? Can somebody pretend to be from Brooklyn, please? So I'm looking for an apartment in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, right? And I do the customary thing. I leave my cell phone number with all of the like 1,700 real estate brokers who patrol the 12 square blocks of Fort Greene. And I'm walking up Fulton Street, my cell phone rings, and it's one of these brokers. It's this British woman. I'm not going to do the accent, you know. I do a pretty fair, you know, Marlon Brando, The Godfather, but British is not on my repertoire. But you've all seen, you know, Monty Python movies and stuff, Tony Blair speeches, whatever. So imagine it. So this British woman starts telling me about this apartment that I should come and check out. It's got high ceilings, it's got wood floors, it sounds really lovely, lots of light. Only thing is, it's not in Fort Greene where I'm looking, right? It's in Bed-Stuy, Bedford-Stuyvesant, another neighborhood, a little further into Brooklyn. Home of Biggie, you know. So I'm like, you know, it sounds cool and all, but I'm really looking for a green. Bed-Stuy is a little bit boondocksical for me, so, you know, I'm gonna pass. And she starts convincing me to reconsider. She's like, sir, I don't know what you've heard, but, you know, Bed-Stuy is really very nice. It's changing very fast, very safe. A lot of white people are moving there. I'm like, okay, right, here we go, you know. 15 seconds with me on the phone, and she wants to have this little kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink conversation and convince me that together, if we join forces, maybe we can gentrify the hood, right? So, you know, I'm like, no, I'm not really trying to be that guy. Maybe D. I'm not trying to really have that conversation. So I'm like, how do I put this, you know, how do I end this quickly and painlessly? How do I dead this? So I say to her, I'm like, well, you know, I don't really like white people that much, and I'm not trying to live around too many of them. Right?
Wow.
And so there's like silence on the phone, 1 second, 2, and then in this sort of quiet voice, she's like, "Sir, how can you say that?" I'm like, well, you know, don't get me wrong, I don't hate them or anything, but you know, they got a certain level of entitlement, walk around like they own the fucking planet. You know, I'm just not really, you know. And she gets real serious on me. And she's like, sir, you know, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I can tell from your voice you're obviously African American. So I'm like, no, you misunderstand. I'm white. And the silence kind of intensifies. And then she's like, how can you, what? You know, how can you say that? I'm like, you know, look, like I said, you know, I got some issues, you know, no offense. And she's like, I'm not offended, I'm black. which because of that British accent and my own internal system of racial identification had never occurred to me. So in the space of about 35 seconds on the phone, we had cycled through all these different identities. We had both been white and black, you know, we had both been pissed off and pacified, and now we're laughing hysterically on the phone with a total stranger. And it was this sort of very real, very bizarre, almost absurd moment. And I think it was significant enough to both of us that we agreed that regardless of this apartment, we should meet up the next day and have some coffee and like unpack this a little further. And that's the end of the story. It's not like, and I married her. You know? But, you know, that's sort of like a corner of the kind of absurdity and complexity around race that I'm trying to address in the book. So, you know, I know you guys are coming to the end of the semester. I don't want to make any assumptions about who has or has not read it. So, what the book is about for those who haven't gotten to it yet, let's say. It's about an Afrocentric white kid named Macon, who grows up in the suburbs of Boston, as did I, in the late 80s, early 90s, as did I, and he finds himself politicized by the music of the time, which I'm sure you guys have dealt with extensively and already probably knew about coming in, because SF State students are fresh like that. The era of Public Enemy, Boogie Down Productions, X-Clan, Stetsasonic, Brand Nubian, Jungle Brothers, when hip-hop's politics were overt, were as sharp as they'd ever been. His critique of whiteness, of white privilege, of the hypocrisy and complacency of the white people he sees around him sharpens, and he becomes sort of enraged. And he moves to New York City to go to college, as did I. And he begins driving a taxi cab, as I did not. And he begins robbing white passengers in his cab around Wall Street. And he starts at gunpoint. And he tends to call them white devils, give abbreviated screeds on the evils and invisibility of whiteness, and then kick these folks out of his cab, having taken their wallets and their neckties. And curiously, he's able to get away with this for several weeks. Not because he's physically hidden, but because no one can seem to connect what he looks like with his actions. In other words, they can't really process the notion of a white kid committing racially motivated crimes against white people. So instead, word goes out that some kind of crazy militant black cab driver is sticking up white people. So New York City is thrown into a panic. You know, white people don't want to take cabs anymore, which means black people can finally get cabs. You know, white people start carpooling to work. It's like, you know, the Montgomery bus boycott on acid for a couple of weeks. Eventually, Macon kind of allows himself to be arrested. He spends a brief sojourn in jail, emerges famous or infamous with this enormous platform, and founds the Race Trader Project and calls for a National Day of Apology, based on a statement in Malcolm X's autobiography. Malcolm says the nature of racism in this country is so pernicious, so persistent, that really white people should just walk up to black people on the street and apologize. Now, for Malcolm, this is a rhetorical statement. My character, Macon, is like, we're going to do this shit on Friday. So people flood into New York City from all over the country to participate in this kind of well-intentioned, ill-considered, and ultimately quite disastrous day of apology. And things kind of take off from there. So I was going to maybe read a little piece. Yeah?